Hello, welcome to Dissident Canada. My name is Tyler. And today, more stupidity out of the EU. Specifically, their talk of using Russian assets in a financing scheme, and I do mean scheme, to fund more shenanigans in Ukraine. And by shenanigans, I mean overt acts of terror, such as continuing to attack nuclear power plants. I just, before recording, was catching wind and reading about such an attack inside of Russia. Now, it's not a big, massive attack. They only attacked a cooling tower. But, you know, don't be doing that, to say the least. You don't want to do that. Anyways, I have long stated on this issue that the EU kleptocrats really haven't seized the assets. They've frozen them, but they haven't seized them in such a way. I said they can't do that, and I never really elaborated on that. Well, now I'm going to do that because it's an insanity that deals with not just the Eurodollar system, which is extremely important and highly recommend that you do, in fact, go check that shit out. Uh, Jeff Snyder and Brent Johnson are probably the best guys to learn from, if you want to know. You can also check out Tom Longo. Tom Longo focuses, yes, on the Eurodollar, but he talks more about the politics and the control mechanism of trying to control the Eurodollar and thus the monetary system and thus the world. Um, Very much hates London bankers, which I agree with. And as I will get into, this could be their downfall, which would be fantastic. And sacrificing Europe may be necessary to do so. I think we extract the cool Europeans to like America, but like there's so few of them, so it's not the biggest of priorities. But anyways, so the EU's financing scheme, real simple. They want to sell Eurobonds backed because they think they have to sell bonds backed by something. They have to do what is essentially a collateralized loan because they think nobody is going to buy their bonds otherwise. I don't necessarily agree with that for a lot of reasons. One is, if you look at the indicators in Europe for economic activity and you look at bank balance sheets and what's going on, they want government bonds because they're scared to do shit. Now, regulations are such in the EU for banks that they can get away with a whole hell of a lot that you can't really get away with domestically in the United States, and Canada for that matter. But banks still do it. They just offshore it, whereas like the EU is some of those regions where you offshore shit to do some shady stuff. Um, so they think they have to collateralize the bonds. Again, I'm not entirely sure they have to, because if you look, I want to say European bonds for the most part are only slightly up, and that's on the political shenanigans that's falling out right now, such as what's going on in France with Macron and Merz and Stammer. So, I mean, you could go into a whole bunch of others that are going to have political trouble as well. And then funding problems due to that problem, but the root cause is the economy. Anyways, so collateralized bond sale, where, hey, we will protect your bond investment with the Russian assets. Now, I don't think they'll actually do this. The guys at the RAND think otherwise, and they are geopolitical experts at this point. They say otherwise. I am more along the lines of someone you would trust with why you wouldn't because of economic reasons. Um, but the political reasons for doing it are there and they are strong. But if they go down this road of not going from freezing assets to seizing and then using them as, collateral for what is a loan, like it's a collateralized loan. Let's not joke ourselves about it. It's a collateralized loan with extra steps, but it is a standard collateralized loan, otherwise guaranteed by an authoritarian, autocratic nightmare technocrat hellhole of a pseudo government known as the EU. And the reason why I don't think they do this is purely economic, because the banks in Europe are basically the only thing keeping Europe moving economically, all right? And they have been for a while. Like, yes, Germany was the industrial powerhouse of Europe, but that's not really saying much, okay? Like, there's other countries that do things like, France exploits the hell out of its former colonies to get cheap, I believe it's plutonium, so that they can then use that to power their nuclear reactors and then sell that at a really good markup to neighboring countries, because power is important, cheap power is good. But exploitation is the way of the European autocrat and nobility. They know no other way to make money. So other than certain areas having other ways of making money, it's mostly the banking cartels that are in essence run by what's left of the nobility at this point. Um, Especially London bankers. Fuck London bankers. Anyways, so they're the only things really keeping Europe up, and that's basically everywhere in the West right now. Banks are the only ones really keeping GDP up because they're the ones making the loans to hedge funds that are levering up and buying equities, which keeps driving things higher and higher, except gold. That is mostly still central bank buying, which is weird, but once you understand the politics of geopolitics, or what's going on in geopolitics right now, you're like, oh, that's just hedging because they are scared shitless of being cut off from the dollar, or having any more flows of dollars being interrupted. So, one of the things why European banks are scared shitless of specifically this funding scheme with Russian assets is because the European banks are where you go to hide shit. Governments do that. Like, the reason there is a euro dollar system, which is just dollar denominated loans that originate outside of the United States, very simple to understand, grew out of the fact the Russians, specifically the Soviet Union, but really it was Russia itself, okay? After World War II, got a little scared about having their U.S. dollar assets, bonds, null and voided by the increasing anti-communist rhetoric in the United States. Which, anti-communism is fine, but like, if you know history, it got real crazy there for a while. Like it hit a peak of propaganda that's just, it's peak propaganda, and it's really wild to go back and look at. So what they did is they used French, Belgian, and other banks to hold their dollar assets as a proxy. Right now, okay, well, those assets are frozen. I mean, it's not the same assets because Soviet Union fell a while ago, but yeah, technically there could be like some 30-year bonds. And no, they would have matured a couple years ago. So there's not any real bonds, but they would have re-upped on stuff. So there could be re-upping of assets from that year, from that they're still being held. It's only like 90 billion or something like that. So it's not massive, but when you look at other countries who do this, who know they need access to dollar denominated assets, specifically, they need government bonds, because if you have US government bonds, that is the base collateral layer for the financial system that is now globalized. You don't have that, you don't have access to dollar funding, you are screwed. As can be seen by China moving their dollar denominated assets from the PBOC's balance sheet to banks in Belgium, specifically Belgium banks. It's known about. And that's where this gets into very bad. You have massive amounts, like incalculable amounts of foreign, either diplomats, like the country itself, or like royalty, who has, again, incalculable amounts of wealth in these European banks that is earning them a return. All right? Think along the lines of the Saudis. The Saudis pull in something like 4 trillion a month, all right? From oil. It is ridiculous, and they have for like a long time. All right? The GDP numbers do not reflect this. The wealth of Saudi Arabia is the Saudi Arabian royalty is ridiculous. Their monthly burn is in the trillions, all right? Okay? You are talking ungodly amounts of money that is impossible to calculate because we don't know what and how much money is the primary investment, and we can't make it. But anyways, if you cut those Russian assets off and you illegally seize them, because that's what it is, and then you use them as a collateral for a loan, all right? You are signaling to the rest of the world that uses Europe for its dollar assets and other investment stuff that Europe is no longer viable. All right, that's kind of been true since this war began and they started with the seizing of assets. And the drift away from Europe has happened, and it is, but it's slow. You start collateralizing other people's shit and saying, hey, we're going to use your collateral, your property, all right, to get a loan so that we can then destroy you. How long do you think the Saudis is going to keep all their monies there? They're not very long. Now, there's very few places they can move it realistically, right? Being 100% honest. Like, again, the amount of wealth they would be moving is unfathomable. All right? You are probably talking realistically like the more than the GDP of the United States for a couple years, if not more, right? Is how much shit they have around the world. How much of that is allocated to Europe? We have no idea. And specifically, well, when I say allocated to Europe, I mean to the European banks. Right? So, if you do this, that money's going to move out. The banksters know this. They will be talking to the EU authoritarian nightmare assholes in charge, such as the crazy Ursula von der Leyen. And I know that is not exactly her name, but that bitch be lying, so that's what I call her. Anyways, like, there was the other day a vote of no confidence for Ursula. I would suspect if she does not back down on this scheme, more of that is going to happen, and eventually she will be removed because bankers are really the real power brokers when it comes down to it. If banks say jump, all right, eventually, if enough of the big ones say it, politicians will not only just jump, they will start clucking like a chicken too, because they will follow those orders. Because they understand enough that if a bank fails, they're screwed. And if you get a contagion event with multiple banks failing, they are royally effed. And in Europe, it's much different because there is a very well known history of what happens when you royally screw up as a politician. It's not so much here in, say, North America. Like, there was no consequences for 2008. But European history is when you get an economy so bad, like it is, and you have situations where people have no trust in the money or the money system, the rivers run red for a while. Okay? Like, the principal incitement of the Russian Revolution was, in fact, the economy, and Nicholas being a weak ass little bitch, to be fair. But you had the same thing with Louis and the French Revolution. You had a extremely weak ass little bitch, and in a shit economy that was getting worse and worse and worse. Sounds familiar. You have a confidence problem with the money, you get a catalyst, and boom, you have revolution. And I specifically bring up the Russian and French revolutions in Europe because for like 100 years after both of them, the European nobility were scared shitless of a repeat. That's what happened in 2008 with the GFC. You had what was left of the nobility. Now I know they can't no longer call themselves nobility anymore, but they are those remainders of the nobility, and they think of themselves as that. They're a bunch of pricks, by the way. They were terrified of a revolution. Terrified. Like, it is bred into them, the horrors that the nobility faced during those revolutions. Like, you could get something in Europe right now, it's a powder keg. All right? With how weak governments are in Europe, in EU countries, you could very easily have situations akin to the Haitian Revolution, which was, it had more muskets than what happened in Rwanda, but it was very similar, where you had a lot of limbs being hacked off. It was not one of those American Revolution or American-esque style revolutions where it's like, yes, we were fighting for principles. Oh no, it got dark, and it got dark immediately. It went way bad. Way bad. To the point, all right, with the Haitian Revolution, there were slaves who, like, went through the revolution and were kind of like, they got halfway and they're like, can we go back, please? This is way worse. Yeah. Revolutions, never fun, except for one. It wasn't all that fun because it got very dire there for a while. Anyways, like, practically, if they go through with this asset scheme, like, you're gonna have a serious confidence problem with the European zone as a safe haven for assets. So you'll have capital flight, and you'll have capital flight in a situation where banks use those assets, like use deposits, and then go do stuff such as, hey, you give me $100 billion, I will go take this $100 billion and buy an asset. Whether it's, real estate, maybe it's some gold, probably not, because banks really don't have that on their balance sheet because it's slow as hell and it earns no return. And it's costly to store that shit. But, they typically buy assets. If now you have a capital flight problem, well, now you got a banking crisis because those banks have to sell their assets all at the same time. So you get a fire sale, price go down, and they need to pay. Yeah, so you get a European banking crisis, the likes they haven't seen, based on a confidence problem. Which is why, again, I don't think this goes through. I think they continue to do what Europe has done, which is threaten shit. But then, for the most part, back off. Like, yes, they have given long-range missiles to the Ukrainians. All right? Some of those missiles could be used to hit, very important buildings in Russia. All right? Whether they be of historical importance, which would be a morale blow. It would really piss off the Russian people, by the way. Or it could be important, like say, hey, we're going to strike the Kremlin while the Security Council is meeting in it. Like, you could do dumb shit like that. All right? But they haven't. They have limited the strikes for the most part. Again, the Ukrainians do dumb shit and crazy, insane shit. But it is very much been limited. Like, as far as I'm aware, like, Germany and the UK have ICBMs that you don't have to have, like, they can carry a conventional payload. They're not like the nuclear variety. Or they could be equipped for the nuclear variety, but they also have conventional payloads. They have not given that shit to the Ukrainians and said, have fun, here's Moscow. Like, that hasn't happened. All right? Again, to the best of my knowledge, because some shit the Russians are keeping on the down low of what's going on, because, my opinion, like with the attacks on nuclear power plants in Russia, they keep that on the down low, because if that was widespread, knowledge on, say, Russia's equivalent of CNN, the Russian people would be crying for, like, wiping Kiev off the map. Like, Putin is playing a very delicate game, and he is trying his best not to give in to more of the hardline factions in his country that are completely and utterly done with the West and would, some of them are like, yeah, let's start throwing some real problems their way. Putin has limited the scope of the military operation and has controlled it fairly well, after the invasion that was, like, people misrepresent that invasion as like, this was a strike to completely decapitate Ukraine and, like, take over the country. That's not what it was. It was very clearly a strike at Kiev to scare the ever-living shit out of the Ukrainians and get them to surrender, which they were about to do up until, Boris Johnson and the rest of the deep states in the West were like, okay, but what if you didn't, and we give you a whole bunch of guns, and we send our totally not active special forces dudes to give you some backup on the front line? What if we do that? And we'll give you some money so you can have some fun with your very much bad habit of the white powder, dude. Like, That's what happened. Anyways, I have gotten a little bit off topic about the assets, so I guess I'm done. I am still waiting on more information coming out of Carney and Trump before I can really give something there. I think they are working towards a deal. I think China is still the issue because it's always China with Trump these days. But Canada is very much at some point going to make a deal with the United States, as can be signaled by a CBC article that is titled "Canada Not Angling to Get Out of F-35 Contract with the U.S.," says head of defense procurement. That title says it all. We're going to make a deal. It's only how much pain we're going to go through until then. And if you believe that Pierre would have made a deal earlier, you might want to get what's between your ears examined, because he was not going to make a deal faster. Because again, China's the sticking point. And I mean, there's probably other sticking points, but China was is almost guaranteed to be the sticking point. And like the Canadian banking cartel is completely fine with that, because so far Trump hasn't used a nuclear option to cut them off from dollar funding. But they also need that sweet Chinese drug money. So they're gonna continue to advocate for that. Although they do also need normalized relations to happen, because they need those sweet dollars flowing properly again. Anyways, that's the video for today. See you tomorrow with something. No idea at this moment. But, I come up with shit all the time. Until then, have a good day.